So welcome to day 3 of our Healthy Living Summit. When I had this idea to host the Living Summit, I reached out to some of my friends and I said to them, hey guys, COVID is taking a toll on us. By this time, I think we were in week 5. And I was reaching out to all of my clients and they were at that tired zone. And so I thought to myself, I've got a bunch of resources, which are beautiful people around me who also do therapy and who do a variety of things to support us in living well in these times. So why don't I bring us all together? So one of my colleagues and good friend is Matt Phifer. And so I want to introduce him tonight. The topic is managing toxic relationships. And so let me talk to you a little bit about Matt and who Matt is. Matt Phifer is a therapist. He is also a speaker and he's also a trainer, and so many expertise that he has. He has expertise in toxic relationships, narcissism. You want to ask a few questions about narcissism tonight. Trauma and emotional abuse is also his expertise. He is the founder and the owner of Matt Phifer Coaching, and his training, which is featured in a number of different places, has been offered in multiple states in the US. Matt is on the state side and also here in Canada. He's regularly featured on the radio, in various publications online. And Matt also has his own blog. Matt, what is your podcast? Say the podcast name again for me.
It's called Toxic to Triumph, and it's on. You can listen to it on any major podcast platform. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts,
yes,
iHeartRadio, and Pandora Radio as well.
Yes, and so Matt has 2 children, Isaiah and Gabby, and he resides in Dallas, Texas, after spending nearly 20 years in New York and Washington, D.C. So welcome, Matt. It's a pleasure to have you with us tonight.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're going to be talking about how to think through even assessing levels of toxicity within our relationships. Our intimate relationships is primarily the focus for tonight, but we can go other places. So I invite you that as you are listening, if you have any questions, you type them in the question and answer section or in the chat, and I will review each of those as Matt is presenting. And I will also ask your questions just in case he's not seeing them. So here we go. Matt, take it away.
All right. So I want to second what Joan just said. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, because I'm just going to go. But I do want to say that all toxic relationships are very, very different. Each one of them present, even though there's a lot of similarities in all of them, each one of them presents a unique, difficult challenge in each one of them. And when I'm talking about toxic relationships, I will often talk from a perspective as if it's a romantic relationship. However, I do want to preface that when I'm saying romantic relationship, it can be any type of relationship. It can be father-daughter, father-son. It can be a mother, a toxic mother, toxic children. I deal with a very large range of toxicity. I even speak to corporate places about toxic work environments and cultivating healthy relationships. I've seen toxic relationships in various places like spiritual houses, places of worship, churches, things like that. So when I'm talking, as I'm speaking, you might hear some terminology, or you might hear some circumstances that relate, and it may not relate to a romantic relationship, but it may relate to a friendship or one of these other toxic environments that you might be experiencing. So tonight, I really want to kind of break down at the very basic level what toxicity is, what a toxic relationship actually is, and how can you recognize it. Because where it becomes a little bit challenging is that even some of the more healthy relationships have a level of toxicity in them from time to time. And so at times it can be very confusing, especially with the type of toxic relationships that I deal with, where I don't necessarily deal with the physical domestic violence, even though I don't I don't deal with a lot with domestic violence, even though I do deal with some domestic violence. A lot of the people that I deal with are more emotionally abused. So you don't see the bruises and you don't see the trauma that they're dealing with. A lot of the difficulties that they deal with are all internal, and the bruises are internal and the scars are internal. So with that being said, how do we recognize these abusive relationships when we don't have someone that's physically hitting us? We don't have someone that's physically doing something to us, and people on the outside world may not recognize some of the toxicity, but we're recognizing it because we're feeling it on the inside. And so where do these toxic relationships start? And it starts in what's called the idealization phase. Some people may call it the love bomb phase. And the reason why we call it that is, to be perfectly honest with you, if someone were to be abusive right off the bat, no one would date them. No one would put up with it. If someone came right up to you and started to calling you a name and started the abuse right off the bat, there's not a person in this world that would tolerate that from the beginning. And so if you're in a toxic relationship, if you have a toxic friendship, or if you're in a toxic workplace environment, it didn't start out that way. I interviewed a good friend of mine on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she actually gave a great analogy. When you walk into a room and the room stinks, after you've been there for a while, it doesn't stink anymore. And it's not so much that the room doesn't stink, it's just that you got used to the smell. And so it doesn't smell to you anymore. But when someone new walks in again, they might recognize how bad the room stinks. And that's how these toxic relationships are. When you very first get into these relationships, and we go into this love bomb phase, and we go into this idealization phase, the person is charming. The person is close to, if not perfect. If it's a dating relationship, it is a person you feel like this person is your soulmate. You feel like this is the person that you've always been looking for. If you are a single mother, this person is more than likely going to be the perfect father figure for your children. If you are someone who typically struggles with finances, this person is probably going to be a great provider. This is going to be the person, and there's a reason for this. A lot of this is because they mirror what you're looking for. And they do a very good job, in particular in the beginning, of picking apart what it is that you're lacking, what it is that you need, what it is that you're looking for, and they mirror and they identify exactly with what you want.
So hold on a second. So what you're saying is, for most of these relationships that then become toxic, are you suggesting that the individual is planning and strategizing from day one?
Yes.
So these are individuals that are naturally, what might we call them? These are individuals who are surveying the territory, surveying the lands. They're preying on you.
Yeah, and I know we have an intercessory prayer on the line, not PRAY. They are PREY on you.
Yes, they're preying on you,
right.
And
I tell people all the time, you were selected. You were selected as their next victim.
Okay.
Because they are looking for certain features in their victims. People who don't have or lack the ability to set and enforce boundaries. And I like to separate the two, because a lot of people may have boundaries, but they don't know necessarily how to enforce them. People who have a difficulty of saying no to people. People who are genuinely very, very nice and are very kind-hearted are typically very good targets for these people. People who like to be liked. People who are codependent. People who don't like it when people are upset with them, people who genuinely have a very good nature to them. And unfortunately, this is a very good breeding ground for someone who's highly toxic, who's highly narcissistic, who's highly manipulative, to come in and use these people to their advantage. And
Okay, so wait a second. So, is there a difference between a relationship where there is, like, some bumps and, some conflicts, and a relationship that is toxic? Like, what's the difference? Because then would you have two different people? Would you have the one who prays and plans and manipulates and, concocts whatever they need to concoct as an image, so you don't even sense that this is a play? And then do you have somebody who's genuine? And then you might have the arguments and stuff like that. So what are we talking about when we're talking about?
So when I talk about some of the features that I look for when someone comes to me about a toxic relationship, because I agree with you, even in the healthiest of relationships, you're going to have some bumps in the road. And quite often someone will come to me and they'll say, I'm in a toxic relationship. I want to leave my husband. I want to leave my wife. And we'll kind of go through a scenario, and we'll kind of go through why they feel like it's toxic. And I'll say, you know what, that's really cute, but no, I'm sorry. It's not toxic. You have some communication issues.
Right.
And the way that a lot of the ways that I can really tell is that we all have intuition, and we all have instincts, and we all have an internal voice that we listen to. And sometimes in the healthiest relationships, we can get insecure. And so there's a big difference between insecure and an intuition. So an insecurity can happen in a healthy relationship and can provide like some of those bumps in the road that you're talking about. I'm insecure when my husband comes home late from work, or this and that. I think that he might be out there cheating, and it may not be any of those sorts of things. It might just be an insecurity because it's in your head. It's because of something that you may have experienced in the past. Your intuition often happens in your body, and you feel it. And I know, and this is something that you can relate to with your practice. They feel it in their body that something's wrong. And in a toxic relationship, when someone comes to me and they start talking about this feeling that I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, that's number one. I know that there's something wrong, and they know something's wrong.
Yes.
And the reason why that terminology and that feeling is so powerful and is so telling to a toxic relationship is that when someone says to me that they feel like they're walking on eggshells, that means that you feel like you can't do anything right. And that's how people who are toxic make you feel. If you confront them, and if you're a little bit more assertive, they're going to act like the victim. If you tell them how you feel, then they're going to flip it. If you feel like it doesn't matter which way you take this, that you're always going to be at fault, which leads to that feeling of walking on eggshells, that no matter what you do, you're always in the wrong. It's always your fault. And even if you are doing the right thing in their eyes, you're still always in the wrong, because that's what toxic people do. No matter what direction you take it, you're always wrong. And they'll play the victim. On one side they'll play hero and act like you're always wrong and I'm always right. And then on the flip side, when you flip it back on them, they're the victim and you're the most terrible person, which leads to that feeling of like, well, I don't know what to do. I'm walking on eggshells. I can't talk to this person. I can't, if I talk to them, if I bring up how I feel, then I'm wrong there. If I cook it this way, there's nothing you feel like there's nothing you can do. The other element that I typically see, even if someone doesn't feel that feeling of walking on eggshells, they have a feeling of they've lost certain elements of control. And some of the control is typically very, very powerful. One person may have all control of the finances, and the person feels like you are trapped. as if like you can't leave.
Mm.
Even in the healthiest of relationships, you should feel like you can leave if you choose to. I tell people you should always love the person in such a way that the person feels free. We choose to be with the people that we're not prisoners.
Right.
You know, and of course, even in the healthiest of relationship, there's a cost that if, you know, there, of course, if, you know, if there were a divorce, unfortunately, even in the healthiest of relationships, of course, there's going to be some bumps, and of course, there's going to be, you know, dividing of assets and things of that nature. But in a toxic relationship, you feel like all hell will break loose.
Mm.
For example, there was a woman that I spoke with that if she were even 5 minutes late from work, her husband, the person she was with, would completely wipe out the bank account. And you know, and eventually over this period of time, like we were talking about before, of walking into the room and it stinking, and eventually you get used to the smell. He eventually convinced her to leave her job and to be a stay-at-home mother for their children and for their stepchildren.
Wow.
Well, unfortunately, in this situation with him being as toxic as he is, and now he had already presented a person who was willing to be financially abusive towards her. Now she really had given over all the power because he had complete control of the finances, and now she also didn't have any sort of personal income to come in. Now, I do want to preface, I'm not against stay-at-home mothers. I'm not against, you
Yeah.
know, and there typically is, even in the healthiest relationship, one person who's a little bit better with finances. However, once again, this is a partnership, not a dictatorship. And
Yes.
so there shouldn't be, you know, he had complete access to completely wipe out the bank account, where she would even have to ask permission to even withdraw any type of money. And you know, so there was a complete control there. And and no willingness to compromise or give up any sort of control. And so you'll see this type of behavior. It could be finances, it could be with children. You'll see this with exes using parental alienation to continue control with one person. You'll see smear campaigns of people lying or giving half truths or just outright lies about another person to try to continue control over people. So the element of control is something that you also see a lot in these relationships.
Wow. So when do you decide, at what point is it best to end a toxic relationship?
I always say as early as possible,
Hmm.
but um, every person is very different. Everyone has to account for their you know, their own well-being, and every situation is different. Even though I personally deal with most people that are emotionally abusive, you also have to be very, very careful with these people because um, so when we talk about narcissism, there is such thing as um, narcissistic rage. And even though this person may not have been violent or physically abusive towards you during the relationship, that doesn't mean that they won't be in certain circumstances. And there's a lot of different levels of abuse that they can wreak a lot of havoc with. There's legal abuse. They can damage property. They can they can cause damage to your relationships. You'll see that these people will become stalkers after you were to leave. So each person has to. I say, you have to come up with an exit plan, and you also have to look at what is this person truly capable of. And I tell people all the time that you're not going to get out of the relationship without being scathed somehow, some way.
Hmm.
Some people have to leave literally with the clothes on their back. I've seen people say, you know what, they're using the house and the finances to control. You're gonna have to allow for this to go into foreclosure to, just so myself and my kids can continue to be safe from harm from this person. So there's every situation is very, very different. You know, like I said at the beginning. So some people, it may take some people may take, it may take a year or two for them to get through their complete exit strategy. Whereas some people, the person may discover that they're trying to leave and they may become violent. And so you might need to leave literally right here, right now, tonight, you know? And so I tell people all the time, during your exit plan, you may need a plan A and a plan B. Your plan A may take weeks, may take months, it may take a year. And you may need a plan B of, you know, that you talk to a close friend, a close family member and say, listen, if I call you and I say, you know, you have a code word, you know, hey, let's order a pizza tonight. Then you know that I'm coming tonight, and you know, without any questions asked, you just need to be ready. And for me and my kids, or just me, or whatever the case is.
So a couple of thoughts. One is, I'd like you to explain what a narcissist is for the folks who are listening. I'd like you to explain what codependency is for those who are listening. And then after I hear what you have to say there, I want to ask you a spiritual question, because one of the things that hinders a lot of us who are Christians from ending relationships is our spiritual standpoint, right? And then our desire to remain in that obedient space of not divorcing. Mm-hmm. But I guess the question would be, is a person who is this toxic or toxic at all, is that person capable of changing? And so how long do you hold out in waiting and hoping for the change? I'll let you answer any of those questions any way that you want.
I actually think that they all kind of blend all together. So I'm going to answer what you just asked first. Is the person capable of changing?
Yes.
So in any relationship, and once again, I'll actually get off of we'll get off of romantic relationships for a second, and let's talk about parental roles who are toxic and narcissistic.
Yes.
Because I think parental roles are just they're naturally, we grow. Obviously, there's a point in time in our life where we are dependent on our parents, and we need to be for our own personal survival. But then as adults, it should get to a point where we're becoming more independent. And I think every parent's natural instinct is to keep our kids close. However, once again, we should love our loved ones in such a way that they feel free.
Yes.
So if you don't feel free from your parents, and if you don't feel free to be able to make your own choices, your own decisions, and to have your own life and be independent of them, then there's a problem. And quite often, you'll have a conversation with your parents or your loved one, or I'll intertwine the romantic relationship of how you're feeling. And typically with these type of people, you won't see any type of compromise, and you won't see any type of change. And not only will you not see it, they will place blame back on you. And so there won't be any change. There will likely, at least in the beginning, won't be any there won't even be any promise of change. There will be typically placing blame on you. And not only that, but you'll start to notice that, so we talked about the love bomb phase. We need to talk also about the devaluation phase, where this is where all the abuse lies. Mm-hmm. So typically when you bring anything to their attention, it causes what's called once again a narcissistic injury. So when that narcissistic injury happens, and because their ego is so fragile, they'll typically lash back out at you, and they will. This is where you'll see them start calling names. They will place blame. They will likely start accusing you of trying to leave, trying to cheat, you'll see a lot of deflection. And what happens is that they get off topic. All of a sudden, instead of this being about your feelings and this being about, how their behavior is typically making you feel, you start to feel like they're literally throwing the, then how that, I forgot that, everything at you.
At you,
Right.
right?
Everything. And what happens is that, like, after at the
What's
end
this
of the,
conversation about?
right,
You know?
at the end of the conversation, you're like, you feel lost. You feel like it was your fault. You feel like, and keep in mind, our feelings are our own, right? If, Joan, if I came to you and I said, when we go on our Zoom calls, like, I feel like you hog all the space. That's how I feel. That's my interpretation. Then we have dialogue about how I feel,
Yes.
and in these type of relationships, you start to feel like it's all one-sided, like it's all about them. And I'll allow for that to be the segue into narcissism. Narcissists, and they come in all varieties, make every situation all about them. And so there's a term called Machiavellian, and that's actually what it is, where literally it doesn't matter what the situation is, they'll twist it to their favor. So you can come to them and you can say, what, every time we go on vacation, we go to your destination that you enjoy. We always go to the beach. I would like to go to the mountains this time, and lo and behold, the next time, I guarantee you'll probably end up at the beach again. Right. And not only that, but it will be, oh, well, the last time you went to the mountains, you saw your ex-boyfriend there and you saw your ex-girlfriend there. So it will be something so off the wall.
Right.
But because you're a codependent, or you're an empathic, or because you have a kind heart, the last thing you want to do is, and because you feel like you're walking on eggshells, the last thing you want to do is rock the boat with this person. Yes. Because you know that they're going to issue out some sort of abuse, some sort of punishment. And in the end, you feel like it's not worth it anyway. I might as well just cave into to their demand. And that's the reason why all of these relationships are so lopsided, so one-sided, because it doesn't matter what you do. They're going to do whatever it takes to get their way. I'll let you ask something spiritual.
Yeah. So, the challenge is, so you're dealing with somebody like this, right? You're facing the control. You're feeling really like you've given up everything. You feel like, if there's anything, you're always going to lose, right? And you're feeling depleted in your energies, and the conflict, the rage and the conflict is always there. And if we go to our Bibles, we're supposed to persevere, and I think part of that is there, and the other part is you're going to pray it through, and and so you're listening to the voice to tell you to leave, but you're not hearing the voice and all of that great stuff. And this is what I hear from a lot of people, and a lot of people are always just in that place of wanting to do the right thing. So, the very people you're talking about, they're empathetic, they are kind, they're guilt-ridden, So as part of that, there's already something at play. But now you go anywhere within Christendom or within, religion, and people are going to tell you to stay. Oh, just make it better. You do the right thing. You stay. So how do we still get to a healthy place if there's no possibility of change? How does it happen, Matt? And what's the resolution?
Well, I love it. I deal with that question quite often. I love it when someone asks this, because there is because when I talk to anyone, really, and I know that the person is highly toxic, highly narcissistic, and I talk to them about the importance of going, of not only leaving, but going complete no contact, going cold turkey, and I give all the reasons why, and I can talk at length about how this is very similar to a drug addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Quite often they'll bring up, the fact that we are to love one another, and the fact that we, need to give people an opportunity. And I quickly bring up the greatest narcissist to ever live, and how our Father handled him.
Hmm.
And that was Satan, greatest narcissist to ever live.
I didn't expect you to go there, but it makes perfect sense. Right.
And what did God do? He cast him out of heaven.
Right.
He went no contact.
Right.
Because he knew that there was, and as forgiving, I mean, he's forgiven all of us. He's forgiven
Right.
literally the entire
But
world
him. Right.
of everything. Right?
Yes.
He sacrificed his son to, for us to have eternal life. So we can't say that God isn't forgiving, right? But at the same time, he realized that there's no winning with this guy.
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing I can do. There's no salvaging this relationship. No matter what I do, Satan is going to Lucifer at the time is going to twist this no matter what because he's Machiavellian. He's going to twist this into his favor.
Yeah.
He's going to twist this into his favor no matter what.
Right.
And to my point I was bringing up earlier, even with God casting him out of heaven, even our Lord didn't get out of that relationship unscathed.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Satan, he still wreaks havoc from time to time. And if he, and unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, and which is the reason why God had to send Jesus to save all of us.
That's
right? Because and so even if God couldn't get out of that relationship unscathed, who are we to sit here and say, like, that I can't deal with, I know that I can't deal with this person, and this person is highly toxic, highly narcissistic, will always spin everything into and yes, I need to get out of this relationship, and it's gonna hurt, and I think that another there's a lot of narcissists in the Bible that we can study. Jezebel is another one.
Yes.
And the thing that I like to point out with Jezebel is there's a lot of narcissists who are very, very successful and are highly, and as a matter of fact, I would say majority of the ones that I deal with, majority of the cases I deal with the people I deal with, are very successful. A lot of them are doctors, lawyers, and make a lot of money, and are because I think a lot of times when you start talking about abuse, people think low income, and it's not the case at all. Right. Especially when we're talking about emotional abuse, and it's part of the reason why they choose not to hit you, because they want to continue the perception that everything is going well. So the reason why I like to bring up Jezebel is because I especially as someone who has a lot of spiritual background, I simply ask them, who was the most successful king in the Old Testament? And the first person that everyone tries to think of is David, and it's not David, it's Solomon.
Yes.
And so I ask them, well, who was the second? And then they go to David again, and it's not. It's Ahab, Jezebel's husband. And so we know what type of person Jezebel was and the type of havoc that she wreaked. And we can't look at people's success and think they're not abusive. We can't look at people's success and think that they're not capable of causing a lot of damage, and that they can't be manipulative. You may even be successful yourself. However, you can still be under someone else's control, under someone else's manipulation, under someone else's, I mean, even biblically, the Bible even says that Jezebel is still going to wreak havoc in the end times. As a matter of fact, since we're on spirituality, like I have yet to go to an event where something didn't happen, the reason why, and I tell people all the time, close people I know have a certain level of spirituality, I say, it's the Jezebel spirit. She doesn't want me speaking about this. She doesn't want people aware of what she's doing. She wants to continue the manipulation. And so, spiritually, there's a lot of examples of why we should stay away from these people and why we should go no contact with these people, that they wreak havoc with us, that they, that even though we may have a forgiving nature, that we need to keep these people at a distance.
Yeah, because there's some people that we have to be able to discern that they're unsafe, right? And as soon as you know that somebody is unsafe, the best course of action is to remove yourself or that person from your space, right? And there's a variety of ways that we can do that. But yeah, for the person who is that narcissist, then we have to be extremely careful about how we do that. And you can judge based on who you are living with and what you know about this person and where you think they'd be willing to go or not go.
Mm-hmm.
So how does codependency come into all of that? First of all, what's codependency? And how does it kind of migrate itself into these types of relationships?
So codependency is, long story short, someone who, I don't want to get too clinical with this, but someone who, so if the narcissist spins everything into their direction, the codependent accepts everything and accepts everyone else's responsibility as their own. Wants to be well liked and has trouble setting and enforcing boundaries. Codependent also, I love codependents because they're also very hard workers. But the problem is that they won't stop, and and they don't know, they have trouble differentiating where those boundaries are. Where, for example, going back to our romantic relationships, there should be a well-defined line between who I am as a person and who I am in this relationship. Codependents have troubles with those lines. They typically they have they lack a lot of I don't want to say self-esteem, drawing a blank right now, but
Awareness?
they have trouble self-awareness and self-identity is what I'm looking for. So you will typically start to see a codependent identify with other people and other situations, and latching on to other environments where that's exactly what a narcissist is looking for. Someone who is willing to accept my responsibility and accept my blame and accept everything that I dish out. Because if I know that you lack that self-identity, if you lack boundaries, if you lack all those things, you're the perfect breeding ground for the type of person that I am, because I'm going to dish everything that I have back on you.
Right.
And if you're willing to accept the blame that I'm casting on you, and you're going to accept it, and if that's going to allow for me to control and manipulate your behavior, then I'm all in.
Right. Wow. So I'm looking at some of the comments. So Roseanne is saying, yes, that's the way to go for healing. Number one is validation. And then she's saying income and social standing are not determinants of whether or not they will be abusive. So yeah, she was, just looking at that social status piece. Right. Matt, talk to me about toxic work environments. Because I've worked in these environments that as you were describing it, I was more thinking about my work environments that I've been part of, where it felt like I could do no right in those work environments. Like every time I thought, oh, okay, I'm just doing my own thing. All of a sudden, it's like things would go haywire. And it did feel like nothing I could do was right. And then in addition to that, the blame was always coming, right? Mm-hmm. And so how do these toxic work environments operate? What can we see to let us know?
Toxic work environments are challenging, because it can be one toxic person, it could be multiple toxic people. It could be a toxic supervisor, you can have a great supervisor and you can have terrible coworkers. So it can be a major challenge. I'm gonna because some of the things that we talked about with relationships and with family roles can translate to toxic work environments. So I want to transition to like a different part of some of the things that can be toxic that may not be as recognizable um, with that transition.
Okay.
One of the biggest toxic problems in the workplace is gossip. Or one of the things that you can identify is
Yes.
someone who's a big gossiper.
Mm.
Now, of course, everyone has close friends, and everyone is going to have their times where they're venting.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to talk about times when, and you can tell between the times when someone is venting and when someone is gossiping, because if they're people who are toxic and they're gossiping, you'll start to see them get really charged up, and they like want more of the negativity. And they want to
Yes.
hear more, and they want to dish out more, and people who are venting are looking for a solution.
Right.
And even if, and sometimes they may even just tell you like, I just need to get this off my chest, and it's actually more about an experience that they have. It's
Yes.
not about, it's not about Johnny and Susie and what they're doing, this and that. It's about me, and I need to get this off my chest. And the reason why gossip actually becomes so much of a challenge, it's not even so much the spread of gossip, even though that's a problem too, but it's the person behind the gossip. And what happens is that these people who are gossipers, and if you're engaging in this gossip, well, guess what? That becomes that form of control that I was just talking about. And so a couple weeks ago, I spoke about this, and I um, compared it to a basketball reference. So when you're if you haven't played a sport, you have your players that are starters and you have people that might be on the bench, but they still get a considerable amount of playing time. Then you have people on the end of the bench who oftentimes are there because they have bad attitudes. They
Mm.
may be great players but have bad attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is that you might have one player at the end of the bench who has bad attitude and another player who's working to try to become a starter and try to get better. And the one that has a bad attitude will typically suck that person back in and suck that person at the end of the bench. And typically the way that they do it is they start talking about how, oh, you know what, you're a better player than the person ahead of you.
Mm.
But the coach is, he just has it out for you. He's only playing this player because of this person's parents. He's only playing that player because it's his favorite. He's only playing that player because it's his son or it's his daughter. And that type of atmosphere typically happens in the workplace. You'll start gossiping with these people, and when you're ready for a promotion, you may be very deserving. You might be, it might be your time, it might be your place, but guess what? This person that's gossiping, they're not going to let you get that promotion.
Mm.
Because guess what? If you get promoted, now you become the enemy. If that person at the end of the bench now becomes a starter, now you're the enemy. Now I'm on the end of the bench by myself. I have no one that I can relate to. This is that whole codependent, narcissistic dynamic that I was talking about. And that you can see that in the workplace too. If I'm sitting here gossiping with you, and then now all of a sudden you become a supervisor, you're the person I was just gossiping about.
Right.
So I have no one to relate to. So you'll find that these people that you're gossiping with, each time you try to do better, each time you try to encourage someone else to go for a promotion, or you try to become a better employee, they're going to suck you back into that negativity. They're going
Uh-huh.
to suck you back down, and they're going to keep you. They're going to keep you at a certain pay level. They're going to, because if you start to accelerate, you'll they start to become they start they it forces them to look inward and start to realize that the problem isn't the supervisors, the problem isn't my coworkers, the problem is me. Well, guess what? They're truly narcissistic. They don't want to do that. They're not going to want to face inward. So they much prefer to keep you down at their level.
Wow. All right, guys, if you're online, please ask some questions and I will make sure that Matt responds to them. We're at 7:45, so usually we use the last 15 minutes to address any questions that you may have. So feel free to go ahead and put those questions in.
I do want to, so as people are typing, I do want to say something about toxic relationships and codependency all at the same time.
Yeah.
So typically when someone comes to me about a toxic relationship or a toxic workplace, I compare it to pests. I tell the story oftentimes. I think you might have heard the story before, where one time I had a bat in my house, and I talked to a friend of mine who was an exterminator, and he said, if you found one bat, you probably have others. And I had him come out, and basically I had a bat cave in my attic, and I had no idea. And it's very similar to when you find out and you discover that you're in a toxic relationship, you find out that you have others and there's other ones in your situation. There's other environments, and the other part to that is with the codependency. A lot of that is because you're looking for validation. You at some point in time, you could have great parents, but at some point in time your feelings were not validated as a child, so you're looking for the outside validation from other people. I think that's an important part of codependency that I missed explaining it earlier, is that people who are codependent need validation from someone else. And so that's a very tough habit, and that it takes a lot of work to break that and to realize that you can validate your own feelings, that you are the person that needs to validate your own emotions. You don't need others to validate anything.
Wonderful, wonderful. Roseanne is asking us to explain why individuals are alienated when they don't participate in negative behaviors like gossiping or putting others down. So I guess this would be like in the context of where you have individuals who are toxic, and maybe multiple individuals, maybe even in a work environment or wherever.
Toxic people always isolate, and they always shun those that are that. So going back to narcissism, one of the things that narcissists do is they don't hang out with anyone that doesn't praise them and isn't completely 100% on their side. And so what happens is, and I'm gonna circle this back around to kind of the question, but I need to kind of explain. So in a romantic relationship, you'll see that a narcissist will isolate that person, and any person that, like, so for example, if your parents are telling, you'll notice that parents might tell a person, like, I don't really care for your boyfriend, I don't really care for your girlfriend, I don't really like the way that they talk to you. Well, the narcissist hears that, they'll push those people out of your life, and they'll either cause drama to get them out of your life, or they will, they'll create an environment where those type of people are no longer a part of your environment, and that the only people that are in your environment are the ones that are co-signing on what they're saying and what they're preaching, so to speak.
Right.
That same type of thing happens in the workplace. So if you're not participating in the gossip, and good for you if you're not, if you're not participating in the gossip, well, guess what? Going back to that analogy before, like I was telling about, now you're a starter on the basketball team. You're not a part of the bench. You're not a part of the people that are you are willing to work hard. So you're the enemy. Right. They don't want, you are the person that causes them to look inward and realize that they have to work harder, that they have to change, they have to make changes in themselves. Well, they don't want to hear that. They don't want to deal with that. They don't want to, they don't want any part of that whatsoever. They would much rather make you the enemy than to make any changes or compromise themselves.
So for the individual who is in a relationship with, it's a toxic relationship, I want to encourage folks to analyze themselves. Am I the toxic one? So that's the question that you want to ask. And then,
well, I want to pause real quick, because I want to be very careful with that, because especially if someone's been with a narcissist for a long time, they will do a good job of convincing you that you are the problem.
That you are the problem.
Right. And where you have to, and they'll even convince you that you're the narcissist. So you have to be careful about, am I the problem? And analyzing, like, am I the problem?
Right.
I would say more along the lines of, is this relationship a problem? And
Yeah.
is this, and it, it really comes down to something a very simple analogy. Is this person in my life an anchor, or is this person an engine? Is this person helping move me forward, or is this person holding me back? And it really comes down to one of those two things. And
So if the person is an anchor, or so can the person be an engine and still be toxic? Is that, are those two things impossible? Is it an,
I don't think it's impossible. I think that if you notice that they're an engine, that the engine is only going one way, and that the engine is only, if they're toxic, the engine is only going in the direction that that person wants, and it never goes into the direction that you want.
I see.
Where there should be some compromise, like we talked about before. Where we went to the sandy beaches on our last vacation. Let's go to
Yeah,
the mountains now. We
yeah,
watched your movie last time. Can we watch mine now? And
right,
we had, it shouldn't be just this one. You know, you shouldn't feel like it's always about one person all
right.
the time.
Right. So then does the direction of, you want to assess your relationship right now. So the direction is about this relationship. Is this relationship an engine? Does it move us forward? Both of us moving forward together? Or is it an anchor? Are we both stuck? Is that kind of a general question that we want to ask?
A general question, and I think that also you also want to, going back to what I was talking about earlier, you want to feel what your body is telling you.
Mm,
And in these situations, I don't even like saying you want to hear what your mind is telling you, because they play so many mind games, they play so many, and the reality of it is that the same part of the brain that deals with addiction also deals with toxic relationships. So your mind is actually going to play tricks on you in
right.
these types of situations, and you're going to think that you're going to want to try to salvage this relationship, but your body is going to tell you something completely different. And your body is going to tell you, like, you feel like you're walking on eggshells. This is not. I don't feel safe here. I don't. You may not have even. They may not have ever laid a hand on you, but your body is going to say, like, something about this situation isn't right, and I don't feel safe here. I don't feel comfortable here, and I don't like this. And that's the reason why, and it's called cognitive dissonance, where your mind might say, like, oh, we can work this out, and your body's going to be like, no, I don't feel comfortable here.
Very good. Donna is asking the question: when you notice a narcissistic, toxic person who is a leader in the church, leaving that environment is a correct and best thing to do. What do you do when you see how they hurt and are abusive to members?
That's tough. So it's I think what we first want to do when we see that someone is um, being toxic or unhealthy to someone else, we always want to bring it up to them, and unfortunately it has to be their decision. And that goes regardless if that is with the church, regardless if that is with our friends, our family members, our sons, our daughters. Quite often, a parent will come to me and they'll say, my son or my daughter's in a toxic relationship. I'm like, and they like, can you call them? I'm like, unfortunately, like, they need to call me. It has to be their decision.
Yes.
They have to realize that this is a problem. Now, in a church situation, in a church setting, the good thing is that when you leave, quite often it will be an open door, and people will say, like, will realize, even without you saying anything, and I encourage you not to say anything. People will realize, like, oh, so I'm not the only person who sees this. I'm not the only person who feels uncomfortable here. I'm not the only person this, and I'm not the only person that. And then now all of a sudden you're a leader, and they will come to you and, like, hey, is there a reason why you left? And you can even just say something that you don't even have to bring up the person's name. I just felt like it was time. I felt like, I didn't really feel as comfortable as I felt in the beginning,
Yeah.
and quite often dialogue will start to happen, and they might start to bring up some of the abuse that they experience in church. You know,
Right.
then you can have a little bit of dialogue, but you have to be careful of getting into gossip and things like that. But once you leave, other people will start to see, and they'll start to notice.
So one last question, and this one is from Kim. She says, do all toxic relationships involve a narcissist?
No. Short answer to the question is no. So I use the term narcissism a lot, but the reality of it is it's called a cluster B spectrum, and narcissism is one of the classifications on that long list of spectrum. But a lot of the behaviors are similar between a narcissist and, I'll say, a sociopath and a psychopath. You know, but I typically say narcissist just to keep it very general.
Yes.
Now, with that being said, just because someone is toxic doesn't mean that they're narcissistic. And to that, I typically tell people, it's not focused on the title so much. Who cares if they're not, you know, because a lot of times people will stay in a relationship and they're like, well, I think they're a narcissist, but then other days we're like, maybe they're not a narcissist. I'm like, well, who cares about the title? Like, if they're mean, if they're abusive, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
We can call him an angel if we want to.
Right.
Satan was an angel. You know, at that point in time, narcissism didn't exist. He was an angel, and he was still, you
Right.
know, still a bad person. So
Yeah.
I tell people, let's not get caught up in the title. Let's look at the behavior.
Yes.
And if the behavior aligns with something that is abusive, something that can't be tolerated with, then it doesn't matter.
Right. And if you are in that place where you feel like, you know, I think we always want to give everybody an opportunity to change, right? So, you know, we want to give them those opportunities to do it different, to try the healing process. You know, I have hope for some of even the narcissists, you know, but it is a hard nut to crack, right? Once you are wounded and you figure out that the way to avoid your wounding is to manipulate people and to make them feel like you're giving them what they need for a moment, but you're doing mind games. It's a coping mechanism that a lot of people use. And then some people just learn these strategies. So there is evil in the hearts of men, and then there's goodness in the hearts of men. And we just need to discern the difference. And you give the people a chance to change. And then if there is no change, then at some point you have to make the decision that I have to value myself, I have to protect myself, I have to love myself. And I think that's where, you know, the decision is eventually going to have to be made on.
And I think that also part of the decision and part of the, because I do tell people they kind of go to a period of time where they're kind of being an observer. And during that observation period, because we're, you know, when we're talking about change is difficult even for the best of us, you know. And so even in a healthy relationship, you know, some of the bad behavior, so to speak, is not detrimental to you as a person, right? You're just not quite on the same. One person might be a little bit more disciplinarian with the kids, the other person may not be as disciplinarian. And so you're not quite on the same page. And so it causes a little bit of an argument. But at the end of the day, you both care about the kids.
Right.
But it's not detrimental to you as a person. When someone is toxic and someone is narcissistic, they're detrimental to you as a person. And they can't thrive without you being pulled down, without you being at your lowest, so to speak. And the better you become, the more that they try to pull you down. And so those are very different type of behaviors than just you know, I would prefer if my spouse didn't spend as much money as they did.
Right.
You know, when we're talking about someone who, like I was talking about before, someone who's highly controlling and will wipe out the bank account if you leave. Or I remember talking to someone, and the wife would, this gentleman was very successful, but every time he would come home, if his wife were upset, she would rattle off his social security number by heart. And that was her way of telling him, if you leave me, I'm going to ruin you financially.
Wow.
Because she attempted to after the fact, but those type of behaviors are very, very different and are a lot more scary than just the average. We're not on the same page.
Right.
He's a morning person, I'm an evening person. We don't agree on the same movies. So that's very, very different than that.
Right. Well,
Joan, can
yes.
you hear me, Joan?
Yes.
Sorry, Joan and Matt, because I think I signed on incorrectly, so that's why I couldn't type my notes. I'm under as panelists.
Okay. Yes.
So I'll do it tomorrow. So I'm Helen, and I have a comment, and I was thinking, I think we need a part 2 and part 3 for Matt. Seriously. He's doing great. So I have a comment, and I'm wondering.
That's always the conversations me and Matt have, like a part 2, part 3, part 4. Yeah. So we definitely will.
I'm just going to ask a question just to summarize for everybody. And I think it'd be helpful if Matt could provide at the end or something to send to you some notes for us to identify things temporarily, because I'm thinking of the COVID situation. And I remember like it's kind of like relating to our situation right now while we're self-isolating and everything. You know how before we have so much information and we feel like, I'm one of those type of people that when I see or hear information, I always ask myself.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my goodness, am I a narcissist? Oh my goodness, I'm codependent. Like everything that he said, I'm sitting here like, oh, I'm just thinking every bit of it is myself. And I'm overthinking, overreacting. And exactly like the COVID, when we didn't have that information and everyone was freaking out, where we were like, I have allergies and I'm also have a flu at this March season, right?
Yeah.
And everyone was getting kind of like, oh my goodness, do I have this COVID-19? Kind of as an example. Yeah. So I think it'd be kind of neat. I know it's hard because the spectrum of being codependent and also of being narcissistic, it's a huge thing to ask for, to how we could actually narrow down somehow like,
right.
No, you're not like this. Like he addressed it, but it's kind of hard still sitting back and thinking, oh, do I have
Absolutely.
this? Do I have this? Yeah.
Yes. So we're at 8:03. We don't have much longer. So Matt, do you want to just quickly tie that one up with a response?
So let me just clarify, Helen, are you asking like, how would you tell if you're
like a checklist of sorts?
Well, yeah, I'm thinking that you could probably, you don't have to answer it now, but I'm thinking that he could send that information to you. You can include that as part of your recording notes after. So definitely not now because it's near the end. And it's too much for him to answer right now, for sure. It's like.
Yes, we'll have a chat about maybe a resource list that we can send folks that they can assess, you can do an assessment.
Do you want to talk about codependency next week?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
great.
Thank you, Matt. This was an awesome chat. I hope those of you who are online enjoyed hearing from Matt about toxic relationships. So Matt, can you tell us how people can reach out to you? I'll give his contact information in a follow-up email, but why don't you just say how folks can reach out to you, Matt?
You can always go to my website, mattphifercoaching.com. You can always email me, Matthew Phifer at Matt Phifer Coaching. On all major social media platforms, Matt Phifer Coaching on Instagram and Facebook, TikTok, Matt Phifer Coach on Twitter. And you can always listen to the podcast Toxic to Triumph, and that's on all major platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Pandora Radio, and iHeartRadio.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. So tomorrow we are talking about financial planning and budgeting in this time of COVID. As we are, on lockdown, we are thinking about our work. For those of us whose work have been completely shut down, we are talking about financial stability. But for the years to come, we're also talking about financial planning, and Zainab Williams is going to be joining us tomorrow. So welcome, you're welcome to join us. Please spread the word about the Healthy Living Summit. Get your friends to attend. Once I send the link on to you, please spread the word and share the link with them. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
No problem.